session to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Hines. I'm the CEO here at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. Are you indicating that you can't quite hear me? Uh-oh. Let's turn up the volume in the back there, and I'll scream into this microphone in the meantime. But thanks to the exact replica of the United States Chamber that we have here for you, and thanks to everyone who is joining us online. We're just thrilled to welcome all of you for this important discussion. I'll start by saying here at the Institute, our work strengthens American democracy by working to convene bipartisan dialogue and through our work in civic education. And I'll say that every single year, tens of thousands of students come through the same doors that you all did to be senators for a day. And they debate with each other issues of national importance. And they come to recognize that politics and our governing institutions are exactly the places where they belong as well. And that's one of the ways that we work to inspire the next generation of leaders. Now, the timing for tonight's conversation could not be better. We are already in a presidential and congressional election that will culminate in 13 days. And as we look to how elections will turn out, or this election will turn out by state, there is often a focus on the vital role of Latino voters and how the role they will play in the outcomes in our national election. Or the focus on how Democrats and Republicans are working to earn or influence the Latino vote. And so we're honored to have two of the country's foremost experts here with us tonight to discuss this important issue. Mike Madrid and Ray Suarez, thank you both for being here and doing this. This topic, by the way, is important for this election, but it's also at the heart of who we are as Americans, who we are as a country, who we are in our politics, and who we are in our families, oftentimes all of the above. In one example, as I transitioned from the state senate here in Massachusetts and was campaigning for statewide office, I often found myself talking about how my two children are part of the migration story, as their mother, my wife, and her family have come from Mexico starting when my kids' great-grandparents started that trip. And I cannot overstate how central this is to what we're all going through as a country. I want to say briefly that I'm grateful to be hosting this tonight with two incredible partners, with Conexion and Phyllis Barajas, who you're going to hear from shortly, and the Massachusetts Business Roundtable. Both are doing such incredible work for our Commonwealth and beyond. So now I'd like to invite the Roundtable's fearless president and CEO, my friend, Judy Chesloff.
Thank you, Adam. Good evening, everybody. I just want to very quickly thank our partners, the fabulous Phyllis Barajas from Conexion, who you're going to hear from in a few minutes. Adam, thank you to you and your team for hosting us in this incredible place and for all the really remarkable work that you guys are doing at the Institute. Of course, for our two speakers, thank you so much for being here. I really look forward to this conversation. And to all of you, both here and watching us online, just thank you for caring enough about this issue to be here. Right? We are at a really consequential time in our country, and we have a very consequential election coming up. The Latino story is a significant part of that, and I think it's really important for us to take the time tonight and hear from experts about it. We're spending a lot of time at the roundtable educating business leaders, policymakers, and the public on issues important to the election and post-election. And we're thrilled to be part of this with Adam and Phyllis, so thank you all for allowing us to be part of it. Phyllis, throw it over to you. Again, the fabulous and wonderful Phyllis Barajas.
You always see them do that, okay? I'm sure you didn't notice that I'm not tall. I don't use the S word. You can think about what the S word is. So anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I am absolutely thrilled that we're doing this. I want to thank JD and Adam for being the co-host for this event. I don't often mention this, to people anymore or even ever. But one of the reasons I'm passionate about this topic, about Latinos, about our civic engagement, about this wonderful country. I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants. I'm also proud to say that I'm the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the United States Department of Education during the Clinton years. And something that people don't know, out of 1,850 appointees during that administration, and he had the most Latino appointees of any president to this day. There were only 140 Latino appointees, and I'm proud to say I was one of them. So I'm delighted to be here, shades of my former brilliant past. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to just briefly go into my prepared remarks since I want to get to these two amazing presenters that we have here this evening. Let me find them first. Conexion was created about 20 years ago, and the purpose for creating this organization was about Latino demographics. And the fact that as the youngest demographic and the second largest demographic in the country, we were not at parity. And that was 20 years ago. And so, as a social entrepreneur, I decided we had to do something. So we created this organization to help Latinos gain access, build social capital. I can't think of a more timely topic, fast forward to today, for this conversation to be happening. We have two brilliant men, people who happen to think about these things very deeply. We have Ray Suarez with us this evening and last night talking about immigration in a new and different way that help people understand that it's a much more complicated conversation than the border. It goes way beyond border. And his book is We Are Home, Becoming American in the 21st Century. It's worth the read, starting from our founding fathers to the present. And of course, what brought us here this evening, and Mike Madrid, welcome to Boston. I'm so glad that you said yes and came and joined us tonight. Mike Madrid, some of you may know from the bio that was in the registration that he's a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Some of you may know what that is. I refer to as the, I hope you forgive me, Mike, if you describe it this way, the disaffected Republicans that decided that this was something they had to do to maintain the values that they thought were really the real values of the Republican Party as they knew it. He'll say more about that, I'm sure, in his remarks. And his book, and the topic of tonight is so important. It's called The Latino Century, How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. And this is a democracy that applies to all of us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Madrid, and Ray Suarez is going to be interviewing Mike or having an exchange of a conversation. The planning meetings have been fascinating. Adam said in one of the planning meetings, after these gentlemen were done, he said to me afterwards, "This is going to be awesome." So thank you.
Well, don't lay on the pressure, Phyllis. Yeah. Now I have to be awesome. Mike, it's so much fun to finish this book, so much fun to talk to you. I am not a politician, but I do believe in giving the people what they want. So let's start, since we're inside 2 weeks. You're a numbers guy, you're a research guy. What does the election look like to you today?
Pass. No, one of the reasons why I wrote the book was because I was seeing in 2020 the shifting of two coalitions, which I knew mathematically were going to be determinative in this election cycle. There are, of all of the groups that are moving, and there are not many, we're an extremely polarized, calcified country, as you all know, at this moment in time. There are two groups that are moving. One is there are college-educated Republicans are moving to the left, U.S.-born, non-college-educated Latinos moving to the right. those happen to be my two areas of specialty over 30 years, ironically, and so I felt I needed to write a book because my worry was that Latinos would be moving faster than college-educated Republicans would be coming to the left. It's a short way of, or maybe a long way, sorry, Ray, of saying I do believe that the fundamentals of this race benefit Kamala Harris or any Democrat, candidly, at the moment, and I think that it's obviously going to be a very, very close race, but I do think that the fundamentals and the math are moving in the right direction to see her be elected President of the United States.
You note several times in the book that the national vote, collectively, of Latinos in California and Arizona and Illinois and New York and Florida has been slowly eroding for the Democratic Party. How do you explain that? Why is that happening?
In a nutshell, what we're witnessing is the transformation of the Latino vote away from a voting group that has largely viewed itself and been viewed by the dominant society as a racially and ethnically focused voter to an economic and pocketbook voter. It's voting far more by class than it is by race and ethnicity. A lot of this has to do with demography, migratory flows, and the fact that the vast number of Latino voters that are coming onto the voting rolls every day, Latino turns 18 every 30 seconds in this country, are third and fourth generation now voters. And the third and fourth generation Latino has a tectonically different perspective on the prioritization of the issues with which they are addressing those issues, and they are far, far more economically focused, pocketbook issued, populist issues than they are issues relating to immigration reform, for example, or
not an issue they've had to deal with.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, for 30 years, Ray, polls have been very consistent saying affordability, the economy, jobs are a top concern. And I have never, and I've worked with Latino politicians, present company excluded, of course, who have ever focused on an economic agenda for our community. The overwhelming focus of the community and the politicians and the media narrative has been on immigration. We're going to talk a lot about that today. It's obviously very, very important. And it's important to Latino voters, but it has never been a priority. And for that reason, after decades, there's an alienation from the political process, from the fastest growing segment of the working class and the working poor, which is disproportionately Latino for demographic reasons also, to say, why should I vote? Like, what am I getting out of this? I want to hear about how I'm going to pay the rent. I want to hear about what we're doing to bring the cost of eggs and gas down, and what I get in response is, well, the Republicans are racists on the border. And they'll say, yeah, but I still need to feed my kids and pay the rent. And I think unless you've lived sort of hand to mouth and not quite paycheck to paycheck, it's really hard to understand that reality, how different the world looks when you're in an economy where you are suffering and the party you have aligned with for so long keeps telling you, you just don't understand that the S&P 500 is doing really well.
Well, you wrap the Democrats on the knuckles, and you back it up with an explanation for why, which is vital in making this argument, for talking to Latinos solely as an ethnic group.
Yeah.
But hold on a minute. If you listen to the way that Republican national leaders talk to them, they do the same thing. How come it seems to bother many Latino voters less when Republicans do it?
Well, let me be very, very clear about this. I do wrap the knuckles of Democrats. I've been doing that for 3 decades. But I throw a haymaker to the face of Republicans in this book. Okay? This is not an apologia for the Republican Party. This is a damning book on the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is, and its nominee is an existential threat to this republic. I believe that firmly at this moment in time. So I just want to be really clear about that. The premise of what I'm arguing is that both parties in many ways for the same reason, are missing the entire ball game of what Latinos have been quantifiably been telling us they want out of their government. That's the point. And so the New York Times just 3 or 4 days ago came out with some really fascinating findings on a poll of just Latino voters. And one of the most damning ones was that most Latino voters believe that the Democratic Party, quote, understands people like me. But when they asked, is the party going to do anything to help people like me, the numbers dropped through the floor. And the reason why that's so problematic in a political construct is because you have a nominee for the Democratic Party right now, Kamala Harris, who has to convince them, Latino voters, that not only is her party going to do something for them that is quantifiably going to change their lives, but that she's going to be different enough to do something to change their lives. That's a really, really hard sell, especially when you have a Donald Trump type figure who's coming in and selling a lot of populist ideas, taxes on tips, anti-Chinese stuff, deregulation stuff when Latinos are disproportionately employed in the energy patch of the Central Valley in southern New Mexico and the Central Valley of California and Colorado and on and on and on. 1 in 5 Latino men are employed in the residential construction industry or a related field. Let me say that again. 1 in 5 Latino men in this country are employed in the residential construction space or a related field. So when interest rates have tripled in the last 3 years, and our currency has been devalued by 20%, you're gonna have to spend a lot of time, effort, and energy convincing me that this community is not feeling an economic pain more now than they were during the last administration. You can set COVID, look, it's not just Latinos setting COVID aside. I can explain exactly why Latinos are behaving the way they were during COVID. But the reality is they were feeling much more prosperous under Donald Trump because they were. Because they were. And as a political professional, my job is to listen to people and understand what they're saying and advise my candidates and advise my clients on how to develop policies and or solutions to meet those needs. It's not to say they don't understand what they're feeling. And there's so much of what is emanating from our political system that is doing precisely that. So I don't believe that Donald Trump is some sort of a Pied Piper who is somehow playing some magic flute and Latinos are somehow coming to him for some unknown reason. There's a lot of evidence, for example, that other Republicans are actually doing far better than Donald Trump with Latino voters. Ron DeSantis in Florida got 57% of Latino voters. Greg Abbott meets or exceeds his numbers. Doug Ducey, former Republican of Arizona, exceeded Trump's numbers with Latinos. California, Brian Dahle, sacrificial lamb, running against Gavin Newsom in the primary, surpasses Donald Trump's numbers with Latinos. Every single Republican in a swing House seat right now, every single one of them did better than Donald Trump with Latino voters. That is really strong evidence that Donald Trump is not bringing Latinos into the Republican fold. He is preventing a larger shift from happening. And that's what I wanted to examine, is are the economic undercurrents which we're seeing while our classes are separating, are they stronger now as a political decision-making factor than race and ethnicity? And it's hard to make the argument that that is not happening. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that it's not at least a very significant part of it. And as we grow in number, by the way, 80% of all of the US Latino growth that has happened over the past decade and is likely to continue is happening with the US born. You can't build a wall to stop it. It's already happened. You needed to build the wall 30, 40 years ago, okay? Like, it's too late. All that growth is happening. So all of these people that are moving into third and fourth generation, who are saying, this guy's not talking about me, are responding first and foremost to their economic situations, which they've been saying for decades. We need some sort of relief. We need some sort of an agenda. This is what I need from government. And they're not getting it. So they're voting not more conservative. There's very little evidence that Latinos are moving to the right on the political spectrum. There's very little evidence to say Latinos are becoming more conservative. There's a lot of evidence to suggest they're becoming more populist. That they're just saying, none of this works, it's all a fraud. I believe the Democrats are telling me what I want to hear, but I don't believe for a moment they're going to solve the problem. And this guy over here is against the entire system. What do we have to lose knowing things aren't going to get better for us regardless of who's in office?
But if we took the labels off, tore off the label off Kamala Harris, so she was just candidate A, and took the nameplate off of Donald Trump so he was just candidate B, and their parties as well, the research that I've seen would indicate that Latinos want from government still to have, they're not shrink it till you can drown it in the bathtub people.
Correct.
They want a government that works. They think it is essential that public education works. They want public transportation. They want public libraries. They want public park systems. They want housing systems where the government is a houser of last resort if the marketplace is not working for them. On every one of those counts, one party would seem to be the inferior of the other. The one party that is totally skeptical about the value of public education, and in many places in the country, actively trying to undermine it. One party hates public housing, the notion of public housing, and thinks that the government has no role in the housing market, doesn't want to provide public transportation. Yet, the party that would at least nominally say it does want all those things, wants to support all those things, is the one that's losing ground with Latinos.
Yeah, that's right.
So is it the argument not being made effectively?
No, nobody. I'm going to try again. They don't believe that the Democrats are going to do anything that is going to meaningfully resolve any one of the single issues that you mentioned, because they haven't. Because they haven't. They believe that what the Democrats are saying, but they don't believe that anything is going to get done. One of the only other American politician who has met or exceeded Latino support levels, defying conventional wisdom in the polling numbers, beyond Donald Trump, was Bernie Sanders. Okay? Bernie Sanders won the 2020 California primary largely on the dramatic overperformance of Latino voters. In these same precincts where Latino voters, where Bernie Sanders was winning in the primaries, we saw some of the most significant rightward shifts. Same thing in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. They're becoming a voting group that is losing faith in the party that has been telling them, we understand you on every one of those issues. And that's the danger. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I'm setting a 5-alarm fire and saying, it's not that they don't believe you, they do believe you. But the data is showing overwhelmingly that their lives are not improving. Because they're not. Look at my home state of California. 30 years ago this year, the most Latino state in the union by a wide stretch. 30 years ago this year, we as Californians, put on a ballot measure called Proposition 187. It was the most draconian anti-immigrant measure probably to date in this country over certainly the last 30, 40 years. And it created a backlash amongst Latinos who for the first time voted as a multi-generational voting bloc, and began the process of politicization for an entirely new generation of Latinos. Some of those names you might know. My dear friend Alex Padilla, who I met during those times in the late 20s, he now sits in the US Senate, one of these seats over here, I think, from California. Antonio Villaraigosa, the former Los Angeles mayor, who was a nemesis early on in the book. I talk about our relationship. I ended up running his campaign for governor in 2018. And on and on and on. It's a whole generation of Latino politicians. But by virtually every economic metric, Latinos are worse off now than they were 30 years ago, even though California has seen an explosion in the number of Latino representatives. And California has gotten decidedly more progressive, more blue. Housing affordability is by far the worst in our state than anywhere else. Poverty rates are the worst in California than anywhere else. We suffer from an obesity epidemic, which doesn't sound like a poverty metric until you realize the only type of food that our lower classes and middle struggling people can afford is fast food and garbage from, convenience stations. That's what we're feeding our children. We're overrepresented in prisons, and on and on and on and on. But you know what? We've got a lot more Latino representatives, a lot more Latino members of Congress, a lot more Latino mayors and council members. And what we're realizing as a community is the idea that representation was the goal is a flawed premise. It's meaningless if you're not seeing results in your community. And what we're witnessing, again, is not a movement, I would argue, towards the Republican Party as much as it is away from a system that they don't believe works, because they're not seeing anything work. And we can call that a failure of one party, or we can call it a failure of both parties. I think both of those are true. But ultimately, the conclusion that I come to is we are at a very pivotal moment as a country and as a people where we Latinos need to stop relying on the Democratic Party to fix our problems, because it's not. It has a really poor 30-year track record of proving that to be the case. And I'm absolutely not going to rely on the Republican Party to care about us, right? In fact, that same New York Times poll had Donald Trump's level of support at 37% of Latinos are supporting Donald Trump. But only 30% believe that Donald Trump understands the problems of people like me. That means there are 7% of Latinos, right? Like 20% of his support base doesn't even think that he gets them, but they're still gonna vote for him because I know what I'm getting if I keep doing what I've been doing. That definition of insanity, right? No somos pendejos, right? Like at a certain point where you wake up and you say, if you're not gonna take care of the problem, then what's the difference? What difference does it make? And that's, I think, fundamentally what we're facing. That's the crisis in our democracy. That's the challenge we're facing, is we're losing the engagement of the largest, fastest growing segment of the working class in this country at a time when we are becoming a non-white country. America will be a non-white country in the next 15 years, driven almost entirely by Latino population growth. And this community, get this, we just surpassed the African American vote in 2020 as the largest ethnic minority. It's largest. Almost 40% of our voters are under the age of 30. That's crazy. 20% of our voters will be voting for the first time in 2.5 weeks. 16 days, you said, that scared me. It's already been 16 days we're gonna have this election. We're already the largest ethnic minority in the country, and half of us are under 30. Like, this tsunami is coming, it's hitting now, and both parties are absolutely perplexed by it. And you're seeing this desperation setting in with the Democratic Party going, wait a second, you're not behaving like minorities, you're not behaving like non-white people. We're the party that gets you. We're the party that you are supposed to be voting for. And this is not a new trend. It's been going on since 2012. It's just gotten so big now, it's unavoidable. And so again, that's why I'm raising the alarm bells and saying, you're going to have to start delivering and producing results if you're going to get to this community. Sorry about the long answer. One last piece to wrap up on. I don't believe, again, that it's a failure necessarily of the Democratic Party that I'm concerned about. I certainly don't think it's a failure of the Republican Party. Both of those are true. It's becoming a failure of Latino political leadership to define an agenda based on economics and upward mobility. That's the solution. It can't be focused on racial or ethnic issues when we don't believe that as a people anymore. I shouldn't say anymore. I don't want to say it's zero sum. It is an important issue, but it's not a priority now, and it never has been, and it's becoming less of one every year. We have a class problem we need to address as much as we have a race and ethnic problem.
The uptake of community college has been tremendous. There's been rapid growth in the percentage of Latino teenagers who finish the 12th grade, and a tremendous uptick across the country in heading to community college. When I listen to you, I'm thinking, maybe when you talk to a 20-year-old Latino who's getting an associate's degree, you should talk to them as a young person with all the issues that go along with that, instead of as a Latino.
That's exactly it. That's exactly right. But we have such a need in our political system to characterize non-white people as an aggrieved minority. I didn't understand that. I went to community college. I graduated with a stunning 2.1 GPA from Moore Park High School, 1989.
Still passing, though.
Yeah, barely. I got out. They were happy that I just was not coming back. Just get them out. Community college saved my life. Because in California, we have free college. It can be done, okay? California's been doing it since the 60s. Like anybody who wants to go to college in California can go. And so I came back with my 2.1 GPA, and I fell in love with school. And I got my act together, and within 3 years, I transferred to Georgetown University and came to the East Coast to continue my studies. But it was here that I realized, here on the East Coast, that I realized race in this country is overwhelmingly, if not entirely, a black and white construct. The first chapter of my book is called Between Black and White, because that construct does not work anymore. It hasn't worked for a while. I understand our original sin. I understand our 250-year history. I understand our 450, 500-year history. I get it. But we have completely missed the ability to understand what America is becoming when we default to this basic construct of what race and ethnicity is. And that is going to be an extraordinary challenge for our institutions. Look at our political parties. They're doing a terrible job of it right now. Terrible. But that is going to define not just who Latinos are in our own sense of self, it's going to define who America is as we go through this transition into being a non-white majority country. I think it explains a lot of the political behavior of some of our politicians. I'll give you a specific example. You know, in 2016, we heard Donald Trump's rallies focused almost entirely on the build the wall chants. Remember? Build the wall, 2016. You never heard that in 2020. What you heard was law and order, right? It's about George Floyd. And the reason why was because they were looking at the math and saying, we can't upset Latinos anymore, but what we can do is we can pit brown people against black people, right? And that's what they did. And so there was a concerted effort to continue the racially driven narrative, but it wasn't focused on Latinos anymore. It's focused on black Americans. Fast forward to 2024, and what they're realizing is we can do both. We can actually do both. Because not only can we separate white Americans from black and brown people, but we can separate black people from brown people, and we can also separate brown people from brown people. And that's why you're hearing everything from Haitian immigrants are eating dogs and cats and pets to some of the words that are hearing about the border and mass deportations and camps. All of this is designed to divide the community, and I think one of the great ironies, and again, I explore this in the book and we're talking about it now, is the Republican Party has actually become more diverse under Donald Trump than at any time in its history up until the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Think about that. The Republican Party is more diverse now than at any time since the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And the Democratic Party is less diverse. The Democratic Party is consolidating white, wealthy, college-educated voters, smattering of Asian voters, but it's losing black and brown voters. And they're losing them largely along college-educated lines and working-class lines. And the Democratic Party will double and triple and quadruple down on racial identity politics because it believes that that's the way non-white voters are motivated, because that's the way they've been motivated for the past few decades. In the case of Latinos, for African Americans, it's been obviously far, far longer. But it's not working anymore. It's not. In fact, you can be openly nativist, which is a code word for racist. It's a diplomatic way on the Senate floor of saying racist, as long as you're speaking to the strong economic undertows of what is happening in our modern economy and you're going to be the beneficiary of these voters broadly. It's not just a Latino phenomenon. It's happening actually in every immigrant-dense precinct in the entire country, this rightward shift.
You talk about the distance from your own family's coming to this country, or the country coming to it, and today, and how that has an effect on the way you see this 62+ million group of people that you may be a member of, but you don't necessarily think that you are a part of every part of it, and they are not a part of you. We are strangers, I would submit, to each other in a way that makes it possible for you to sit in the Atlanta metropolitan area or the Orlando metropolitan area, or turn on the TV in New York and hear a former president of the United States talk about Venezuelans in Aurora, Colorado, a place you've never been, Venezuelans who you are unlikely to meet or even see. And a person of tremendous authority and influence says that gangs have taken over the entire city, that they would walk into your living room and slit your throat, walk into your kitchen and kill you as easily as they'd look at you. I look at that and I think, what a crazy thing to say. But apparently, for no small number of people, it's pretty effective. They've never been to Aurora. They don't know any Venezuelans. They don't live in a place where there are large portions of resettled people who are living under temporary protected status. We are strangers to each other in a way that makes those messages more potent, more scary, and more effective.
Yeah, well said. That's absolutely right. And, you know, as I'm listening to you, I kind of want to believe that maybe this is a function of the digital age. Maybe this is a function of our modern era. Maybe this is a function of the loneliness and the isolation we all feel because we're living more on our phones than in the parks around our communities. But the truth of the matter is this has always been the case. One of the first Republican campaigns I ever did, I talk about in the book, in 1992, I worked for Elton Gallagly, who was one of the fire-breathing anti-immigrant members of Congress at the time, and it was extraordinarily effective. I have never seen now, still to this 30 years later in the business, an issue that immediately at a visceral human base level divides people the way immigration does. And I knew that after the Dobbs decision, there was only one way to stop the leakage of more white Republican women, college-educated women, from going to the Democratic Party. And that was by talking about illegal immigration. Because, and here's where I will lose the audience if I haven't lost all of you, while women have been measurably, demonstrably moved by the Dobbs decision, I still don't believe for a moment that what's scarier to a woman than losing her bodily autonomy is the threat of an illegal immigrant, a brown man, breaking into her bedroom window in the middle of the night and committing crimes. And that's what you're hearing. That dehumanizing aspect, this incredible fear of saying they're not just the other, they're savages. They're animals. They're eating pets. They know it's not true. They admit to saying, well, it's not true, but at least we're talking about the issue now because you won't talk about it. It's a conscious effort to instill fear at a very base, primal level, and it was used in the past few weeks the same way it was used 30 years ago when I saw it in California. It's used to frighten women back into the Republican fold. That's why it's used, and it works. That's why you're seeing the numbers as close as they are.
Why, in a country where you are more likely than before to know somebody who comes from somewhere else in the world, 44 million immigrants live in this country now, more than ever before. We are now, as a percentage, reaching the high water mark of foreign-born residents in the United States, about 14%. You're likely to work with a Mariam or a Zayed or a Jose, Maria, and so on, and so on, and so on. How is it that so many people can hear that messaging and say, wait a minute, I don't think that's true. I know people who are from fill in the blank. I know people who've come to this country. They seem hardworking. Their kids go to school with my kids. They're in Little League or after school or whatever. How come even now in 2024, that is so effective, so scary, and so sharp as part of our national debate?
I think, again, it speaks to humans' base biological construct. And I don't know that we will ever get past that. We can mitigate it. And the truth is, a lot of our political leadership thought with the election of Barack Obama that we were past it. I think that's part of our naivete. But I want to use this because I don't have a great answer for it other than that. What I want to do is kind of answer that by extending it out into a broader question about America herself. I'm using the word herself very consciously too for reasons we'll get into. But we've all bought into, to some degree or another, this mythology that this is the one country we can all come to and actually be a part of. That's the mythology of America. That's the beauty of America. Now, if you talk to our black brothers and sisters, they're going to tell you that's just always been bullshit, because it has always been bullshit. And it's easy to sell that when you're in an 85% white country. But as we become a less white country, the very idea, that very basic premise, that very basic American narrative is going to be called into question. It is right now. That's what this race has been about. That's what it's been about since at least 2016. Is, do you really believe that? Or are we not America if we're not a white Christian nation? If you're not of our tribe, can you really be American? That's what this is about. That's what this great transformation is all about. That's what this movement from being an 85% white country, which we essentially were when I was 9 years old, to being a 53-year-old man where I'm saying by the end of my lifetime, by the end of the road, we will be a non-white majority country. And all that torturous process is really a question about the very basic foundational myth of America. Because there is a wide swath of Americans, in fact, it is the glue of one of our political parties that believes that that does not work. You cannot be an American nation unless it's a white Christian nation. It's not subtle, it's not being dog whistled, it's overt. That is the glue of grievance that is holding together one of the major political parties, the party that I spent 30 years working in, before this emanated as the primary reason for why it exists at this moment in time. We had a vice presidential nominee take to the floor of the Republican National Convention and say, America is not just an idea. America is a place. It's a place where 7 generations of my ancestors are buried in the hills of Kentucky. That's blood and soil language. If America is not just an idea, then what happens to the universality of our principles? That we are all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Do we believe that or do we not? That's what this race is about. That's what it's been about since 2016. That's what this fight's going to be about for the rest of our living lives. Why? Because that demographic change doesn't happen in one election. We have the honor of being the American generation that goes through this transformation for the first time in our history. We have never been anything but a majority white nation. And when I say majority, I don't mean 55, 60%. I'm talking 85% plus. The African American community has never been more or less than 11% since the end of the Civil War. Hasn't changed. It's never been a threat to white America. But there is now, when you go into Des Moines and Joe's hardware store becomes La Fiesta Taqueria or Quinceañera dress shop, and the only language we have to explain this or come to terms with it is, well, they're black people are coming too, and they're Haitian immigrants coming to Springfield. The problem isn't Haitian immigrants. The problem is Latinos are, emerging as a huge, huge part of places like New England. As the comedian said, if you made it this far, you might as well just let them stay, right? You come, Latinos are coming all the way to New England. I mean, come on, give them some credit.
We are going to start taking questions. There are roving mics. Show yourselves, roving mics. There's a question right here.
Hi, Stephanie Sanchez. I'm a big fan of the Kennedy Institute and the library and the Kennedy School of Government, and I appreciate that you're here talking about this issue. So my question would be, if Trump, for example, knew that immigration worked in 2016, no surprise he's going back to it in 2024 because it worked then, do it again. So there's fear that you talked about that's not rationally based. My question is, are the Latino voters going to be sophisticated enough to ask, to your point earlier, what has Trump done for me? If they're critical of the Democrats asking that question, will they be of Trump, and specifically him standing in the way of an immigration bill that possibly could have actually moved the needle on this issue?
Well, again, I want you to take notice, and thank you for all of that, too. I'm a big fan of all those groups now, too, especially being invited here. But notice the whole premise of your question was predicated on kind of what have you done for me, what have you done for me, and then it closes again on immigration. Like that in essence is the problem. That in essence is the way the political system speaks to this community. Immigration reform in that bill isn't a top 5, 6, 7 issue for the Latino community. And more importantly, where it is, there's a much, much, much stronger emphasis on border security than there is on a pathway to citizenship or DACA protections. But I want you to really breathe that in for a moment, because I know that the question came from a place of deep sincerity. But that's how deeply enshrined the idea that immigration is central to all Latinos is. And the data overwhelmingly is saying it's not. It's not. So the only way I can answer that is by saying, again, I don't believe that what we're witnessing is a movement on policy towards Donald Trump. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think the guy understands policy. I don't think he has any policies. I don't think he has any policies he remembers 5 minutes later. That's not what he's doing. He's essentially a carnival barker who basically runs against everything that is not him or his tribe. And you can be anybody is welcome into the tribe as long as you stand there and are against whatever he's saying to be against. And but let's also remember one thing here too. Kamala Harris is running on a conservative Republican border security plan, not a centrist plan. She supports the Langford bill. I'm sorry, I still laugh when I say it because it's so patently absurd. And not only is it not only is it the platform of the Democratic nominee, it is literally enshrined in the platform of the Democratic National Committee. I just found this out. They adopted the Langford bill as the official platform of the Democratic National Committee on border security. I worked for George W. Bush. If George W. Bush had seen a Republican running on that platform in the 2000 primary, he would say that's racist and un-American. This is Kamala Harris, a black woman from San Francisco in the Democratic Party, running on a conservative, right-wing border security policy. That's how much the Overton window has changed. And I'm bringing up this point for one reason. Because she would never be doing this unless that's where a majority of Latino voters were at. If Latinos were to her left, there's no way in Mar-a-Lago that she would be taking that position.
But she's running against Donald Trump. That's part of why she's taking that position.
Bill Clinton came close in '94. Let's not, I mean, come on, there's no free passes here. Yes, she is running against Donald Trump. Donald Trump has changed a lot of what we do as He's forever changed who we are. Win or lose, we are forever changed. The Republican Party is forever changed, but really, really important, Latino voters have forever changed. And that's why I wrote the book. Yes.
Hi, my name is Viviana Arostegui-Ham, and the reason I've been hearing some of your speech on PBS and PBR, and one thing that I would like to highlight is many of the Latin American people here in the United States come from countries in South America and Central America. Most of these countries in South America and Central America are being affected by the left-wing socialism and communism that is happening in Venezuela, Cuba, and then I'm going to Ecuador. I'm from Bolivia. I felt exactly what is happening there. And so that extreme left, when they come to the US, they believe that Kamala is exactly like the socialist people that are in South America. So I think since you're in a position that you're speaking to people, maybe you can clarify that in the Northern Hemisphere, from United States and Canada, the dictatorial and authoritarian governments are trying to access into power through the right, through Trump and the right. But in the Southern Hemisphere, from Mexico below, they are accessing through the left. So when those same citizens are escaping Venezuela and escaping other places and coming as immigrants here, they feel that Kamala is just like the left that they had in their country of origin. That's my thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's absolutely true. I do want to put this in a little bit of context because it is important, but and again, I try to spend a lot of time in my book dispelling some of this as well. Everything you said is 100% true and accurate. But I also want to put in perspective how large those diasporas are. If you took the Cuban population in the United States and the Venezuelan population in the United States and added them together, it would be about 7% of all the Latinos in the country. So that sentiment is there. I absolutely will not dismiss it, but that is not a big factor in this shift that we're seeing happening with our voters. The overwhelming, just for a basic overview, 60% of the 65 plus million Latinos in this country are of Mexican descent. And it's not that that's that big. 60% is big, but it's not that big. It's that every other group is so small. Puerto Rican, no other group hits double digits. Puerto Ricans are 9%, El Salvadorians are about 7%, Cubans are 6%, and everybody else is kind of in the low single digits. Moreover, the Cuban diaspora is really largely concentrated in one state. The only way to discernibly look at the Cuban vote is to look at one state, which had a really disproportionately large influence because it used to be the key swing state. It no longer is. That's also, by the way, where a lot of Venezuelans are at, a lot of Central Americans are at. So one state, one of three states where there's not a whole lot of Mexicanos. My point is, everything you said is absolutely true, but in this broad demographic shift, our differences, our political differences, basing them on country of origin, are really more outliers than anything else. That is having an effect, that is having an impact. It's primarily a Florida phenomenon. I'm not suggesting it isn't in other places, but overwhelmingly what we're witnessing is not something that's related to socialism or communism in Latin America.
Hello, hi, welcome everyone. My name is Betsaida Barrett. I would not count the Puerto Rican, we are citizens. So when you're talking about other communities, their importance and their value, I think given that we are already Puerto Ricans and we're citizens, you can take us out and focus on the needs of other citizens here. My question is, we have a large population of students in public schools who are turning 18 soon. What are we doing to educate them I mean, I know you have your book and you have a lot of data and all of that, but my concern is, we are here, we already know what's going on. I've been a teacher, a public school teacher since 1998. My concern is, and I've seen this year after year, there is no one reaching out to our constituents who are turning 18 and voting in high school. These are students who not only come from various backgrounds, but also students from various countries. And they are willing to either join the military or go into citizenship, etc. And I think that we need to have more avenues to reach these students who are being formed or misinformed. And I wish that you would have the reach that you have for us adults towards these people who are turning 18. And I don't care about political affiliation. I care about education and having these students who are going to be in charge of us when I turn an elderly person, educated in what's going on in their country. So I would like to see or hear your point of view in this matter. And I thank you for being here, and I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let me just say on education, there was a learning loss nationwide during the pandemic that I have not heard any candidate for national office talk about. The equivalent of millions of years of learning loss among the tens of millions of public school students in this country. We should be running around with our hair on fire. It should have been a central issue of this campaign. Instead, both candidates are arguing about whether or not they should get rid of the Department of Education, which seems kind of beside the point when you have kids who will reach the front doors of colleges much less prepared at 17 and 18 than they would have been just a few years earlier. It's a crisis, and I have yet to hear anybody, not J.D. Vance, not Donald Trump, not Kamala Harris, not Tim Walz, talk about it. And it's particularly dangerous to Latino kids who are heavily concentrated in large metropolitan area school districts, LA Unified, Chicago Public Schools, New York City Public Schools. Those are some of the places that have put up some of the worst numbers. This should have been, and every year when you ask Latino voters what they care about, education is right up there near the top, along with jobs and wages and the cost of housing. If you wanted to talk to Latinos about an issue that hits very close to home, education could have been one of the centerpieces of the national campaigns, and it was not. So you're absolutely right that we should be talking to young people, especially young people on the edge of voting. But boy, oh boy, are we missing a crisis right at this moment, which will have it's what they call in sociology a long tail phenomenon, because the effects of that are going to be felt when these people go to college, go to work work in the military as well, and you know, they're going to have lower wages at 30 and 35 and 40, and that will affect the housing markets. It's a terrible, terrible thing that happened, and it's shocking to me that it is as little talked about as it is.
Yeah, let me add a little bit more to that, because I think that that's exactly right. But let me also, the crisis in education, Latino education, and I'm not suggesting Ray is saying this, but it began long, long before COVID. One of the things that Ray talks about appropriately is H-1B visas and immigrants. I'm from California, the home of Silicon Valley, the largest Latino state in the union. We're not educating Latinos enough to fill the jobs that we're creating in Silicon Valley. We have to import human talent because we're not doing what I would argue is obvious, the obvious things to educate our children to be employed in the economy that we brag about creating. If you've ever been to one of the campuses at Facebook or Google, it's kind of horrifying. There are these massive, they look like the Pentagon, and it's 90% whites, 8% Asian, and then the black and brown folks are the ones serving food in the cafeterias and washing the cars of employees as part of their employee benefits. Like in California. That is a tremendous failure of our public education system. And again, I don't blame the Democrat or Republican parties for that. There's plenty of blame to go around, but who I am increasingly blaming is the Latino politicians. In California, we've got more Latino elected officials than any other state except for New Mexico. Like at a certain point, whose fault is that? This can be fixed. Our children can learn. As my good friend Antonio Villaraigosa said as the mayor of Los Angeles, our kids can read. In the late 80s, when I graduated from high school with a 2.1 GPA, my only option was going to a community college. The community college system right now is so swamped with remedial reading classes that we can't get students out in 2 years. Do you know what that means? It means our kids can't read. It means our children can't read, overwhelmingly Latino children. That is a failure, a complete collapse of the political system. And I think it's a sin in a state that has so much abundance, so much opportunity for highly skilled workers that you don't even hear us talk about. It's not even part of the public discourse. What we do is we go to Washington to try to get more H-1B visas to bring more people in from China and India to fill these jobs when all of the human capital in our own communities are being left behind.
We have time for one more question, and we have 2 more hands up. I don't know how I'm going to fix that. Can we get a mic to this gentleman here?
I'll be quick. Hi, my name is Byron Williams. You sort of touched on it earlier, but could you talk about, when you say Latino, what are we talking about? and given what I think your answer is going to be, the diversity, are we not guilty of creating a one-size-fits-all whenever we use language like Latino voters and things of that nature?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, one of the big, in 15, 20 years, you're asking a question 20 years ahead of your time, is we are going to say there's nearly no such thing as a Latino. What does that even mean? But that's also it's also a function of the complexity of society broadly, right? The term Hispanic essentially became a federal term in the early part of the Nixon administration when we had to do something with all these Spanish-speaking people, so we called them Hispanic. And the through line was they came from a Spanish-speaking country, including Spaniards, Spain, right? And as that evolved and emerged, you had the definition of Latino, which was basically everybody but Spain that spoke Spanish, right? Because we didn't want European influence as part of this blended society that better identified people. It's becoming a difficult term to use as we become a more diverse people. And by diversity, the real diversity that's happening is not country of origin. The diversity is going to ultimately be generational differences. That's where this story starts to end. So you're asking a very profound question, and it's one of those questions that America will be grappling with as we become a more racially and ethnically diverse country. So I'm not equipped to answer that now, because I can tell you from a data perspective, there are a lot of through lines with Latino voters, but as I say in the book, it is both the easiest group to identify and the most difficult to identify for precisely the reason you're asking the question.
And outmarriage is changing that picture as well. So you're right, ask us both. God willing, we'll both be here in 20 years and we can answer the question. But Byron's question was so brief, timekeeper, that I'm gonna take that other question, that other hand back there.
Before he gets the microphone, the outmarriage she's talking about, interracial marriage rates are over 50% for Latinos by the 3rd generation. And it's not just with whites, it's with African Americans and it's with Asian Pacific Islanders. You can make your own joke about, Latinos from there, but we're a blended people by definition, we're multiracial. So America's becoming very complex in its multiracial aspects. Latinos' blended nature becomes the glue that holds us all together, and that's a big part of why I titled the book The Latino Century.
Yes. My name is Juan Rosado. Thank you for being here. I guess my question is, one message that Trump continues to use, as has been doing his leaders, Republican leaders, is this idea of the great replacement, that millions of immigrants or migrants are coming into the country as a plot from the Democrats, to defeat Republicans. And I just want to understand kind of the messaging angle or perspective from that, and the why, when in reality we know that support for the Republican Party and for Trump continues to surge. And if he wants to win, the election, it will be in big part to Latino voters. Yeah.
Let me wrap this up by answering the question. This is a great question, by the way. The party that's going to be the dominant political party of the next generation is going to be the party that is able to capture the hearts, minds, and votes of a multi-ethnic working class. Democrats have a real problem with the working class right now, and it's been going on for the better part of a decade. They don't believe they are, but the working class is telling them very loudly, we're not with you anymore. The Republican Party, ironically, has struggled with the multi-ethnic piece for exactly the reason you asked the question. Is Donald Trump has tried and been very successful at overperforming with non-college educated rural white voters, right? That's why we're all watching these returns in rural Nevada right now, and rural Georgia, and rural Pennsylvania going, are they going to show up again for a third time? The answer is yes, they will, okay? And at the same time, we're becoming more diverse by he's using this same language. So that's the argument I'm making is, we have to start looking this as a class consideration if the Democratic Party is going to get back into contention and be competitive with this problem that has emanated in our democracy. And the more it focuses on race, the less racially diverse the Democratic Party becomes. Because what it's fundamentally is happening is, and again, if I still had 2 or 3 members of the audience, I'm going to lose you right here before we go sign books. White progressives aren't that much different than white conservatives in that they believe that non-white people should be voting a certain way. And so they speak to them a certain way. And it always comes back to, how can you vote for somebody that wants to put your kids in cages and wants to deport you and kill the immigration bill? Always, always. We can start with housing, but 2 questions later it's going to be on immigration. And that's not where Latino voters are at. And so when you speak to the issues that they're telling you are their concerns, you're going to win those votes. And that's, I think, why we're witnessing the transformation that we're witnessing right now.
The Great Replacement is why I began writing my book. And it is an ugly, pernicious, anti-American idea, both about our shared future and about why people come here to make their lives over. And if you're going to walk around a statue of Robert E. Lee with a torch chanting that I will not replace you, yeah, I am going to replace you. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and I want to reiterate again how proud we are to have you here, and I should have mentioned at the outset the role of Ted Kennedy in the Immigration and Naturalization Act in the mid-60s that was the basis for a lot of this conversation. Thank you all. You two, if you could make your way to the lobby, and we'll give them another round of applause. Thank you for an incredible conversation. If you like this pre-election conversation, come back on December 3rd for a post-election conversation. We'll have 2 former U.S. Senators, Heidi Heitkamp, a Democrat, and Roy Blunt, a Republican, to break down the Senate race and the election as a whole. We'll have that online for registration soon. So now make your way to the lobby, and we look forward to continuing the conversation there. Thanks a lot.